The papers were still in my hands when I heard the front door open 4 hours before it should have. I am Elena, and I have worked as the housekeeper in Damiano Costa's mansion for 2 years. I know every creak in the floor, every hour his car pulls into the gate, every pattern of his long and quiet days. That is why the sound of the door froze me completely. Damiano was never home before evening. Never. Yet there he was, his footsteps echoing through the marble hallway, steady and unhurried, moving closer to the study, where I stood with his private files spread across the desk. My hands were shaking. I had opened a drawer that I was never given permission to touch, searching for anything that might explain what happened to my brother 8 months ago. Now the man who owned this house, the man everyone in the city spoke about in careful whispers, was walking straight toward the room where I stood exposed. I did not have time to close the drawer. I did not have time to think. I only had time to hear a voice behind me, sharp and low, pulling me sideways. It was Nora. She was the newest maid in the house, barely 20 years old, with quick eyes that missed nothing. She grabbed my wrist so tightly it almost hurt, and she pulled me behind the heavy curtain that covered the tall window at the side of the study. I stumbled against the wall, my heart pounding so loud I was certain it could be heard from the hallway. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "Do not move. Do not breathe loud. Whatever happens, do not come out." I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to ask how she even knew to grab me at that exact moment, as if she had been waiting for this to happen. But there was no time. The study door opened, and I heard Damiano step inside. From behind the curtain, through a thin gap where the fabric did not quite meet the wall, I could see part of the room. Damiano walked to his desk, the same desk where his papers still lay open, the same papers I had not managed to put back in order. My stomach turned to ice. If he looked down, if he noticed even one page out of place, he would know someone had been there. He did not look down right away. He set his phone on the desk, loosened his jacket, and let out a long breath, as if the day had already worn him down before it truly began. For a moment, he looked less like the man people feared, and more like someone simply tired. Then his phone rang. He answered without hesitation, his voice calm, but heavy with authority. "Tell me you have good news," he said. I could not hear the other side of the call, only Damiano's replies, but even those few words were enough to send a chill through me. "Someone in this house has been talking," he said. "I want to know who before the end of the week." My breath caught in my throat. Nora's grip on my arm tightened, warning me to stay perfectly still. I understood then why she had pulled me away so quickly. If Damiano believed someone in his household had betrayed him, and if he walked into his study to find his private papers disturbed, there would be no explanation that could save me. He continued speaking, pacing slowly near the desk, close enough that I could see the outline of his frame through the gap in the curtain. He was tall, with dark hair combed back, and a jaw that stayed tense, even when his voice remained even. Everything about him suggested control, the kind of control that came from years of making difficult decisions and living with their weight. "I do not care what it costs," he said into the phone. "Find them." The call ended. Silence filled the room, broken only by the soft tapping of his fingers against the desk. I watched him glance toward the window, and for one terrible second, I thought he was looking directly at the curtain where we hid. My chest tightened. Beside me, Nora did not move a single muscle, her eyes fixed forward, her breathing slow and controlled in a way that told me this was not the first time she had learned to disappear inside a room. Damiano finally turned away and walked toward the door, pausing only to glance at the papers on his desk. My heart nearly stopped. He reached down, straightened one folder, and for a moment, I was certain he had noticed something wrong. But then he simply closed it and walked out, his footsteps fading down the hallway until the house fell silent again. Neither of us moved for a long time. Nora kept her hand on my wrist, counting seconds under her breath, waiting until she was certain the danger had truly passed. When she finally let go and stepped out from behind the curtain, her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp with something I had not expected to see. Not fear, experience. "We need to leave this room," she said quietly. "Now, before anyone else comes." I followed her out into the narrow servants' corridor that ran along the back of the house, a passage most guests never saw, built for staff to move quickly and quietly between rooms. My legs felt unsteady beneath me. I pressed my back against the wall, and finally allowed myself to breathe. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know he was coming? And how did you know exactly where to hide me?" Nora looked down the corridor before answering, as if checking that we were truly alone. "Because it has happened before," she said. "Not to me, but close enough that I learned what happens to people who get caught somewhere they should not be." Her words settled over me like a weight. I thought of the papers still spread across that desk, the ones I had been searching through when the door opened. Somewhere among them was a name, a connection, something that might finally explain what happened to my brother Daniel after he vanished from a job he never should have taken. I had come so close to finding it, and now I was no closer to the truth than before, only closer to danger. "What do you mean, it has happened before?" I asked. Nora's expression changed, the confidence in her eyes replaced by something quieter, something almost sad. "There was another maid here, before you started working in this house," she said. "She was curious about things she should not have been curious about. One day she disappeared. No warning, no goodbye, nothing. The staff were told she left for personal reasons. Nobody believed that story, but nobody asked questions either." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "Do you think Damiano is the reason she disappeared?" Nora hesitated before answering, glancing once more down the empty corridor. "I do not know for certain," she said, "but I know this house keeps its secrets buried deep, and I know Damiano Costa is not a man who forgives being watched." I thought about the phone call I had just overheard, his voice cold and certain as he spoke about someone betraying him. If he believed there was a spy inside his own household, and if he was already searching for answers, then my presence in that study today had placed me directly inside a storm I did not fully understand. "Why did you help me?" I asked finally. "You barely know me. You could have let him find me and said nothing." Nora leaned against the wall beside me, her arms crossed, her eyes distant for a moment before she spoke. "Because someone helped me once," she said. "A long time ago, before I came to work here, I made a mistake that could have cost me everything. Someone chose to protect me instead of exposing me. I never forgot that. I promised myself if I ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, I would take it." Her honesty surprised me. In a house built on silence and careful appearances, her words felt like the first true thing anyone had said to me in months. "I need to know what happened to my brother," I said quietly. "I know it is dangerous. I know I should stop asking questions, but I cannot simply forget him and pretend everything is fine." Nora studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much she could trust me in return. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Then we need to be careful," she said. "Very careful. Because if Damiano finds out what you are searching for, hiding behind a curtain will not save you a second time." We heard footsteps approaching from the far end of the corridor, and both of us straightened immediately, falling back into the practiced calm of servants going about their duties. A moment later, one of the house guards passed us with barely a glance, continuing on toward the main hall. Once he was gone, Nora turned to me one final time before we parted. "Meet me tonight," she whispered. "After the house goes quiet. I think I know something about your brother that you do not." Before I could ask her anything else, she was already walking away, disappearing around the corner as if the conversation had never happened. I stood alone in the corridor, my heart still racing, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned. I glanced back toward the study door, now closed, hiding the desk where the truth about my brother might still be sitting untouched among Damiano's papers. Part of me wanted to walk straight back in and finish what I had started, but I knew that would be foolish. One mistake today was already one too many. A second would not be forgiven so easily. I made my way toward the kitchen, forcing my hands to stop trembling before anyone else noticed. The staff moved around me in their usual rhythm, unaware of how close disaster had come only minutes earlier. I picked up a stack of clean linens and carried them upstairs, using the simple task to steady my breathing and quiet the storm inside my chest. As I folded sheets in the hallway closet, my mind kept returning to the sound of Damiano's voice on that phone call. "Someone in this house has been talking." The words repeated themselves over and over, growing heavier each time. If he was already hunting for a person he believed had betrayed him, Then anyone caught out of place, even by accident, would immediately fall under suspicion. I was no spy. I had no interest in his business dealings, no loyalty to his enemies. All I wanted was to understand why my brother vanished the night he took a job driving for one of Damiano's associates, and why no one, not the police, not his friends, not a single person in this city, seemed willing to speak his name since. I had come into that house 2 years ago simply needing work, needing a way to survive after everything fell apart. I never imagined that behind its polished walls and quiet rooms, I would find myself standing at the edge of something far larger than I understood, tied to the disappearance of the one person I had left in this world. Damiano Costa had come home early that day, and in doing so, he had nearly ended everything before it began. But instead, because of a girl I barely knew, and a whispered warning behind a curtain, I had survived long enough to keep searching for the truth. I did not yet know how far that truth would take me, or how much it would cost, but standing in that corridor, with my pulse finally slowing, and the weight of Nora's words settling over me, I understood one thing clearly. Whatever secrets this house was hiding, I was no longer walking away from them. Not until I found out what really happened to my brother. The clock on the kitchen wall showed nearly midnight when Nora finally found me waiting in the small storage room behind the pantry, the only place in the house where our voices could not travel far. She closed the door softly behind her and pressed her back against it, as if guarding it from anyone who might try to enter. Her hair was still damp from a quick wash, and her uniform had been replaced with a simple gray sweater, but her eyes carried the same sharpness I had seen earlier that day, the sharpness of someone who noticed everything and forgot nothing. "I do not have long," she said. "The night guard changes shift at 1. We need to talk before then." I nodded, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I had made to calm my nerves but never touched. "You said you know something about my brother. Please, Nora, tell me." She hesitated, glancing toward the small window near the ceiling, as if making certain no one stood outside listening. Then she sat down across from me on an overturned crate, lowering her voice even further. "A few months ago, before you started asking questions around the house, I overheard something," she said. "2 of the senior staff were talking in the garden, thinking no one else was near. They mentioned a driver who worked for one of Damiano's business partners, a man named Victor Hale. They said something had gone wrong between Victor and Damiano, something serious enough that Victor disappeared from every gathering after that, and they mentioned that the driver who worked for him vanished around the same time." My breath caught. Daniel had taken a driving job for a man before he disappeared, a man whose name he never fully explained to me, only saying it paid well and the hours were flexible. I had always assumed it was simply a private employer, someone wealthy who valued discretion. I never imagined it might connect to Damiano Costa's world. "Are you certain the driver they spoke about was my brother?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. Nora shook her head slowly. "I cannot be certain. They never said his name directly, but the timing matches what you told me earlier, and the story matches too closely to be a coincidence. A driver disappearing the same week his employer fell out of favor with Damiano is not something that happens by chance in this world." I sat with that thought for a long moment, turning it over carefully, afraid to build hope on something so uncertain, yet unable to ignore how perfectly it fit. Daniel had called me the week before he disappeared, sounding nervous in a way that was unlike him. He said he had seen something he was not supposed to see, something involving money, and people he did not trust. I had told him to be careful, to walk away from the job if it felt wrong. He promised he would finish out the week and quit. I never heard from him again. "What happened to Victor Hale?" I asked. "Do you know where he went?" "No one seems to know," Nora said. "Some of the staff believe he left the country. Others believe something worse happened to him. Nobody talks about it openly. It is one of those subjects that makes people suddenly remember other things they need to do." I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to steady the flood of emotion rising inside me. 8 months of silence, 8 months of searching for any clue, any thread that might lead me to an answer, and now, sitting in a storage room in the middle of the night, I finally had something real to follow. "I need to find out more about Victor Hale," I said. "If he knows what happened to Daniel, I have to find him." Nora's expression grew serious, almost pleading. "Elena, listen to me. If Damiano truly believes someone inside his own house has betrayed him, and if you start asking questions about Victor Hale, you will draw exactly the kind of attention that could destroy you. You already came close to disaster today. You cannot make the same mistake twice. I understand the risk, I said, but I have spent 8 months pretending everything is fine, going to work, cleaning rooms, smiling at guests, all while not knowing if my brother is alive or dead. I cannot keep living like that. I would rather face danger and find the truth than live safely and never know. Nora studied me for a long moment, and something in her posture softened, as if she recognized a determination she could not argue against. She let out a slow breath and nodded. Then we do this carefully, she said. Together. I know this house better than you do. I know which rooms are watched, which staff report everything they see, and which ones can be trusted to stay quiet. If we are going to search for answers, we do it my way, or we do not do it at all. Relief and gratitude washed over me, though it was tangled together with fear for what we were about to attempt. Why are you willing to risk this for me? I asked again, needing to understand fully before allowing her to walk beside me into danger. Nora was quiet for a moment, staring down at her hands. I told you earlier that someone protected me once, she said. What I did not tell you is why I needed protecting. When I first came to this city, I worked for a different family, one far less careful than Damiano's. I made the mistake of taking something that was not mine, out of desperation, more than greed. I was caught. I thought that was the end of everything. But the man who caught me chose mercy instead of punishment. He gave me a chance to leave quietly and start over. No questions asked. No consequences beyond a warning I never forgot. Was that man Damiano? I asked, surprised. She shook her head. No, it was someone who worked for him. A man named Julian, who oversees much of Damiano's household staff, and reports directly to him. Julian is the reason I have a place here at all. He vouched for me, trained me, taught me how this world works, and how to survive inside it. I owe him everything, and in some strange way, that debt is part of why I am willing to help you now. Julian always said the difference between the ordinary staff and people who survive in a house like this is the ability to know when to stay silent and when to act. Today, when I saw you standing in that study with the drawer open, I knew immediately it was a moment to act. Her words gave me a strange comfort, knowing that, even within a house shaped by fear and secrecy, there were still people capable of kindness, still lines that were not crossed without reason. It made me wonder about Damiano himself, whether the man behind the reputation was truly as cold as everyone believed, or whether there were layers to him that outsiders never saw. Do you think Julian would know anything about Victor Hale? I asked. Or about what happened to the drivers who worked under him? Nora considered the question carefully. Julian knows almost everything that happens in this house, and much of what happens outside it, but he is fiercely loyal to Damiano. If we approach him the wrong way, he could report everything straight back to him, and then we would both be in far greater danger than we are now. Then how do we learn more without drawing suspicion? There is a records room on the lower level, Nora said. Most of the staff do not even know it exists. It holds old employment files, delivery logs, and visitor records going back years. If your brother truly worked for Victor Hale, there might be a trace of it there. Something that connects him to this house even if only indirectly. The idea of a hidden records room sent a spark of hope through me, though it was quickly followed by fear. Is it guarded? Not constantly, Nora said. But it is locked, and only a few people carry the key. Julian is one of them. Damiano is another. My hope dimmed slightly at that answer, but I refused to let it disappear entirely. Then we find a way to get inside without a key, or we find a moment when the door is left open. Nora smiled faintly, the first real smile I had seen from her since we began speaking. You are braver than I expected when I first pulled you behind that curtain, she said. Most people in your position would have packed their things and left this house the moment danger touched them. You are choosing to walk deeper into it instead. I do not feel brave, I admitted. I feel terrified. But fear has never brought Daniel back to me. Maybe answers will. We sat together in silence for a moment, the weight of everything ahead settling over both of us. Finally, Nora rose from the crate and moved toward the door, checking the small clock on the wall. The guard will begin his round soon, she said. We should not be seen together this late. Meet me tomorrow evening, after the dinner service ends. I will find a way to learn more about the records room, and when it might be left unattended. I nodded, rising as well, my legs still unsteady from everything I had learned that night. Before she opened the door, Nora turned back to me one final time, her expression serious. Elena, promise me something, she said. Whatever we find, whatever truth is hiding in this house, you will not act rashly. Damiano is not a man who forgives carelessness, even from people he has no reason to suspect yet. If we are going to survive long enough to help your brother, we move slowly, and we trust no one else in this house besides each other. I promise, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered how long such caution could last once we were truly close to the truth. Nora slipped out of the storage room first, checking the hallway before waving me forward. I followed a few steps behind, my mind racing with everything ahead of us: the records room, the missing driver, the mystery of Victor Hale, and the quiet, dangerous world of Damiano Costa that I had only begun to understand. As I made my way back to my small room at the end of the servants' quarters, I paused by the window overlooking the front gate. Somewhere beyond those walls, in a city that never seemed to sleep, my brother's fate was waiting to be uncovered, and for the first time in 8 months, I finally believed I might be close enough to find it. I only hoped that finding it would not cost me everything I had left. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in my narrow bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Nora had spoken, turning the name Victor Hale over and over in my mind until it felt carved into my thoughts. I tried to remember every detail Daniel had ever mentioned about his job, searching for anything I might have missed at the time, some small clue I had dismissed as unimportant. He had mentioned a large house once, though never by name. He had described tall gates and quiet streets, a place where the cars parked outside were worth more than most people earned in a decade. He said his employer rarely spoke to him directly, communicating instead through a Lajo assistant who gave him routes and schedules each morning. I remembered him laughing once, saying the job felt like driving for a ghost, someone present in every decision yet never fully seen. At the time, I had thought little of it, assuming it was simply the nature of wealthy employers who valued privacy. Now, lying awake with Nora's words echoing in my mind, that same description felt heavier, more deliberate. A man who avoided being seen was a man who understood the value of staying hidden, and in a world shaped by loyalty and betrayal, that kind of caution rarely existed without reason. Morning arrived far too quickly. I rose before the sun, my body exhausted but my mind sharp with purpose. I moved through my usual duties with careful precision, determined not to give anyone reason to suspect that anything unusual had happened the day before. I dusted the hallway portraits, prepared the breakfast trays, and avoided the study entirely, unwilling to test my luck twice in the same week. Throughout the day, I caught glimpses of Nora moving through the house, exchanging only brief, careful glances whenever our paths crossed. She seemed calm on the surface, but I noticed the way her eyes lingered a moment longer near Julian's office whenever she passed it, as though she were quietly gathering information without drawing attention to herself. By mid-afternoon, one of the senior staff members mentioned in passing that Julian would be traveling to oversee preparations for an event at one of Damiano's other properties, a trip that would keep him away from the main house until late evening. I felt a small spark of hope at the news, knowing it might create exactly the kind of opportunity Nora had spoken about the night before. When our paths finally crossed again near the laundry room, I kept my voice low. "Julian is leaving today," I said. "Could this be our chance?" Nora's eyes flickered with the same realization. "It might be," she said, "but we cannot rush this. If the records room is left unattended, it will only be for a short window, and if we are caught, there will be no explanation that saves us." "I am not afraid," I said, though my racing heart betrayed a different truth. "You should be," Nora replied, not unkindly. "Fear is what keeps us careful. It is the people who stop being afraid who make the mistakes that get them caught." Her words settled over me, a quiet reminder that courage without caution was simply recklessness, wearing a braver name. I nodded, understanding, and we agreed to meet again once the house grew quiet, when Julian's absence would be at its longest, and the risk of discovery at its lowest. As the hours passed, I found myself watching the clock with an intensity I had never felt before, each minute stretching longer than the last. I thought of Daniel constantly, wondering if he had once stood somewhere in a house just like this one, unaware of the danger closing in around him. I wondered if he had been frightened in his final days, or if he had believed, as I once did, that everything would eventually be fine. The weight of not knowing had followed me for 8 long months, shaping every quiet moment, every sleepless night, every forced smile I gave to strangers who had no idea what I carried beneath the surface. Tonight, for the first time since his disappearance, I felt something shift inside me. Not certainty, not yet, but the smallest thread of hope that soon I might finally understand what happened to my brother and why the truth had been buried so carefully within the walls of this house. The hallway light near the lower level flickered once, then steadied, and I pressed myself against the cold stone wall as footsteps passed just beyond the corner where Nora and I stood waiting. It was nearly 11 at night, and the house had settled into the kind of silence that made every small sound feel enormous. Julian had left hours earlier for the property across the city, and according to Nora, he would not return until well past midnight. This was our window, narrow and dangerous, but real. "The guard just finished his round," Nora whispered. "We have maybe 20 minutes before he circles back this way." I nodded, my pulse hammering in my ears as we moved quickly down the narrow staircase leading to the lower level of the mansion, a part of the house I had never once visited in my 2 years of employment. The air grew cooler as we descended, the walls changing from polished wood to plain stone, the kind of space built for storage and function rather than appearance. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy metal door stood at the end of a short corridor, exactly where Nora had said it would be. A small keypad glowed beside the handle, and for a terrible moment, I feared our plan would end before it truly began. "I thought you said the door might be left open," I whispered. "I said it might be," Nora replied, already crouching beside the keypad. "I also said I would find a way in if it was not." She pulled a small folded paper from her pocket, glancing at it briefly, before entering a sequence of numbers into the keypad. The light above the handle blinked red, then green, and the door released with a soft click that felt impossibly loud in the silence surrounding us. "How did you get the code?" I asked, stunned. "Julian is not as careful as he believes," Nora said, pushing the door open. "He wrote it down once, months ago, thinking no one was watching. I never forgot it. I hoped I would never need it, but tonight, I am glad I remembered." We stepped inside, and Nora closed the door quietly behind us, flipping on a small flashlight rather than the overhead lights, unwilling to risk drawing attention from anyone who might glance toward the lower windows. The room stretched further than I expected, filled with rows of metal filing cabinets, each labeled with years rather than names, stretching back further than I could easily calculate. "Where do we even begin?" I asked, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of files surrounding us. "Employment records," Nora said, moving toward a cabinet near the back wall. "If your brother worked for Victor Hale, and if Victor's staff had any connection to this house, there should be a record of it somewhere, even if it is only a delivery log or a visitor entry." We worked quickly, pulling drawers open one at a time, scanning through folders with names and dates that meant nothing to either of us. The minutes passed faster than I wanted, each one bringing us closer to the guard's return, closer to the risk of discovery. My hands moved faster than my mind could process, flipping through papers, searching for anything that resembled a name I recognized. Then, Nora went still beside me. "Elena," she said quietly, "come here." I moved to her side immediately, my heart pounding as she held up a thin folder, labeled with a date from 8 months earlier. Inside was a short list of names, drivers and staff associated with a private event held at one of Damiano's properties, an event connected to a business meeting between Damiano and several associates, including one name that made my breath catch in my throat. Victor Hale. Beneath his name was a shorter list, staff who accompanied him that evening, and there, near the bottom, written in plain, unremarkable handwriting, was a name I would have recognized anywhere. Daniel Ashford. My brother. My hands began to shake as I stared at the page. The proof I had searched for over 8 agonizing months finally sitting in front of me in black ink on aging paper. He had been here, in this house, or at least at an event connected to it, working for Victor Hale exactly as I suspected. "This confirms it," I whispered, my voice trembling. He really was connected to this world. Nora studied the page carefully, flipping to the next document in the folder, which listed a brief summary of the event itself. A private meeting, discussing what the document vaguely referred to as territory adjustments. Beneath that summary was a single handwritten note in the margin, added sometime after the original document had been filed. "Incident reported following event, under review." "What does that mean?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "I do not know," Nora admitted, "but incident reports in this world rarely mean something good." We continued searching, pulling additional files connected to the same date, hoping to find more information about the mysterious incident mentioned in the margin. Nora found a second folder tucked behind the first, thinner than the others, containing only a few pages. She opened it carefully, and her expression shifted the moment she began reading. "Elena, I think you need to see this." I took the folder from her hands, my eyes scanning the page quickly. It described a confrontation that occurred after the private meeting ended, an argument between Damiano and Victor Hale regarding information that had reportedly been leaked to a rival family. The document stated that Victor denied any wrongdoing, insisting the leak must have come from someone within his own staff rather than himself. Beneath that paragraph was a short, chilling line. "Driver questioned. No further record." My knees felt weak beneath me. "Questioned," I repeated. "What does that mean? Where did he go after that?" Nora shook her head slowly, her own face pale in the dim light of the flashlight. "The file does not say. It simply stops here. There is nothing else in this folder connected to that night." I sank onto the edge of a nearby cabinet, the weight of everything crashing over me at once. Daniel had been present the night an argument broke out between Damiano and Victor Hale, an argument connected to a security leak within Victor's own staff. He had been questioned afterward, and then, according to these records, simply vanished from documentation entirely, as though he had never existed at all. "Do you think Damiano is responsible?" I asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. Nora hesitated before responding, choosing her words carefully. "I do not know," she said. "The record does not say who questioned him, or what happened afterward. It could have been Damiano's people. It could have been Victor's own staff, trying to protect themselves before anyone else could ask further questions. We do not have enough here to be certain of anything yet." I wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the possibility that Damiano was not the reason my brother disappeared, but the fear gripping my chest refused to loosen so easily. If Damiano had questioned Daniel about a leak, and if that questioning ended with no further record of his existence, the most obvious explanation was also the most terrifying one. "We need to take this file with us," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Nora shook her head firmly. "We cannot. If anything from this room goes missing, it will be noticed immediately, and it will be traced straight back to whoever had access to that door tonight. We can remember what it says, we cannot take it." Reluctantly, I agreed, memorizing every detail on the page as best I could, the date, the names, the phrase that haunted me most. "Driver questioned. No further record." Nora carefully returned both folders to their original places, making certain nothing appeared disturbed before closing the cabinet drawer. A sound echoed from the stairwell above us, distant but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps descending toward the lower level. "The guard," Nora whispered urgently. "He is early." Panic flooded through me as we scrambled to switch off the flashlight and move toward the door, our movements quick but careful, unwilling to make a single sound that might betray our presence. Nora eased the heavy door open just enough for us to slip through, then closed it gently behind us, the lock clicking back into place with a sound that felt impossibly loud in the tense silence surrounding us. We pressed ourselves into a shadowed alcove near the base of the stairs, just as the guard's flashlight swept across the corridor above, his footsteps pausing briefly before continuing along his usual route. Neither of us breathed, until the sound of his steps faded completely, leaving only silence in its place. "That was too close," Nora whispered, her voice shaking slightly for the first time since I had met her. "I know," I said, "but we found something real." For the first time in 8 months, I have proof that Daniel was here, that he was part of something that went wrong, and that Damiano's world is connected to his disappearance. Nora looked at me carefully, her expression torn between concern and understanding. Elena, what you found tonight is only a fragment. It raises far more questions than it answers. We still do not know what happened to him after he was questioned, or who was responsible for whatever happened next. Then we keep searching, I said firmly. We find Victor Hale. If anyone knows the full truth about that night, it is him. And if Victor Hale cannot be found, Nora asked quietly, what then? Are you prepared to ask Damiano himself? The question hung in the air between us, heavier than anything else we had discussed that night. The idea of standing before Damiano Costa and speaking my brother's name directly to him filled me with a fear unlike anything I had felt before. Yet beneath that fear was something else, something steadier, a growing certainty that eventually, no matter how much danger it carried, I would have no other choice. I do not know yet, I admitted, but I know I cannot stop now, not when I am finally this close. We made our way back up the narrow staircase in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, the weight of what we had discovered settling heavily over both of us. As we reached the top of the stairs and slipped back into the quiet corridors of the main house, I glanced once more toward the direction of Damiano's study, the same room where this entire journey had begun only 2 days earlier. Somewhere within these walls, or within the memory of the man who ruled this house, the truth about my brother was waiting. I had come too far now to turn back, and despite every warning Nora had given me, despite every reasonable fear urging me toward caution, I understood that the next step in this search would eventually lead me face to face with Damiano Costa himself. I only hoped that when that moment finally arrived, I would be ready for whatever truth he chose to reveal. The next morning brought a tension I could not shake, no matter how ordinary I tried to make my movements appear. I served breakfast with steady hands, poured coffee without spilling a drop, and smiled politely at guests who had no idea what I had uncovered only hours before. Yet beneath the surface, my mind kept circling back to the words written in that file. Driver questioned. No further record. The phrase followed me through every task, refusing to fade. Around mid-morning, I found myself in the East Wing, dusting picture frames along a hallway I rarely visited, when an older member of the household staff named Margaret paused beside me, glancing around before speaking in a low voice. You were down near the lower level last night, she said, not as an accusation, simply a quiet observation. My stomach dropped immediately. I was looking for extra linens, I said carefully, keeping my voice even. I must have taken a wrong turn. Margaret studied me for a moment longer than felt comfortable, then nodded slowly, as if deciding whether to believe me. Be careful down there, she said finally. That level holds more than storage. People who ask too many questions about what is kept in those records tend not to last long in this house. Her warning sent a fresh wave of fear through me, though I forced myself to remain calm. I was not asking questions, I said, only looking for supplies. Margaret gave a small, knowing smile, the kind that suggested she understood far more than she was willing to say aloud. Of course, she said. Just remember, Elena, curiosity in this house has a cost. I have worked here longer than most, and I have watched people disappear for far less than what I suspect you might be searching for. Before I could respond, she moved on, continuing down the hallway as though nothing unusual had passed between us. I stood frozen for a long moment, my heart pounding, wondering how much she truly knew, and whether her warning was meant as a threat or simply honest concern from someone who had witnessed too much over the years. I found Nora later that afternoon in the laundry room, folding linens with practiced efficiency, and quietly relayed what Margaret had said. Her expression grew serious as she listened, her hands pausing over the fabric in front of her. Margaret has been here longer than almost anyone, Nora said. If she noticed you near the lower level, others may have as well. We need to be far more careful from now on. Do you think she will say anything to Julian, or to Damiano? I asked, my voice tight with worry. I do not think so, Nora said slowly. Margaret has never been one to involve herself in matters that are not her own, but her warning tells me something important. She has seen this pattern before, someone growing curious, then disappearing shortly after. That is not something we can afford to ignore. The weight of that realization settled heavily over me. It was no longer only the mystery of Daniel's disappearance that frightened me, but the growing certainty that others before me had walked this same path and never returned to tell their story. I thought of the maid Nora had mentioned during our very first conversation, the one who vanished without explanation after asking questions of her own. We are running out of time to be careful and still make progress, I said. Every day that passes without answers feels like a day closer to losing whatever trail is left. Nora set down the linens and looked at me directly, her expression a mixture of sympathy and resolve. Then we move faster, but smarter, she said. We need a way to reach Victor Hale directly, or at least learn where he has been hiding since his falling out with Damiano. Searching records alone will only take us so far. How do we find someone who does not want to be found? I asked. Nora considered the question carefully before answering. There is a man named Elijah who used to work as a courier for several of the associated families, including Victor Hale's staff before everything fell apart. He left this line of work years ago, but he still lives in the city. If anyone outside these walls might know where Victor went, it would be him. Hope flickered inside me again, small but persistent. Do you know where to find this Elijah? I know the neighborhood he used to frequent, Nora said. It will not be easy, and it will mean leaving the house without drawing suspicion, but it may be our best chance at learning something Damiano's own records cannot tell us. We agreed to attempt the search on my next full day away from the house, a rare opportunity that would not arise again for nearly a week. The waiting felt unbearable, each day stretching longer than the last, filled with the constant fear that Margaret's warning might prove true before we ever had the chance to act on what we had learned. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I allowed myself, for the first time in months, to think clearly about what I would say if I ever did find myself standing before Damiano Costa, with nothing left to lose. I imagined the words forming in my mind, simple and direct. My brother worked for Victor Hale. He was questioned the night of your meeting, and he was never seen again. I need to know what happened to him. The thought terrified me, yet it also steadied something inside me that had been shaking since the moment I first opened that drawer in his study. Whatever truth waited at the end of this search, I was determined to face it, no matter the cost. The door to Elijah's small apartment opened only 3 inches, before stopping against a metal chain, and a pair of tired eyes studied us through the narrow gap with open suspicion. I do not know either of you, he said, his voice rough with the kind of caution that came from years of living carefully. Whatever you are selling, I am not interested. We are not selling anything, Nora said quickly, keeping her voice calm and steady. We need to ask you about someone you used to work with, Victor Hale. The name alone caused a visible shift in Elijah's expression, his eyes narrowing further, his hand tightening on the edge of the door. For a moment, I feared he would simply close it and refuse to speak another word. Instead, after a long, tense pause, he glanced past us down the hallway, checking to see if anyone else was watching. You should not say that name so loudly, he muttered, before unlatching the chain and pulling the door open just enough to let us inside. His apartment was small and sparsely furnished, the kind of space that belonged to someone who valued simplicity over comfort. He gestured toward a worn couch and settled into a chair across from us, his eyes flicking between Nora and me, as though trying to decide whether we could be trusted. Why are you asking about Victor? He said finally. That is a chapter of my life I closed a long time ago, and for good reason. I took a steadying breath before speaking. My brother worked as a driver for him. His name was Daniel Ashford. He disappeared 8 months ago, the same time Victor fell out of favor with Damiano Costa. I am trying to find out what happened to him. Elijah's expression softened slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like sympathy, though it was tempered heavily by fear. I remember hearing about a driver disappearing around that time, he said slowly. I did not know his name, but I remember the story. It was not spoken about openly. People who worked in that world learned quickly not to ask too many questions about the ones who vanished. Do you know what happened to him? I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to remain composed. Elijah leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand across his face, as though the memory itself carried weight. What I know is limited, he said. Victor Hale was caught leaking information to a rival family. information that put several of Damiano's operations at risk. When the truth came out, Damiano confronted him directly. Victor denied everything, insisted the leak came from someone within his own staff. That matches what we found in the records, Nora said quietly. Elijah nodded slowly. After that confrontation, Victor's staff were questioned individually, one by one, to determine who was truly responsible for the leak. Most were cleared quickly. But I heard that one driver was held longer than the others, someone who had access to certain meetings and communications that made him a stronger suspect. My chest tightened painfully. Was that driver my brother? I cannot say for certain, Elijah admitted. I was not present for the questioning myself. But from what I understand, the driver in question was eventually cleared as well. The real source of the leak turned out to be someone else entirely, someone much closer to Victor than any of his staff. Confusion mixed with the fear already gripping me. If he was cleared, then why did he never come home? Why has no one heard from him since? Elijah hesitated, glancing toward Nora, as though seeking permission before continuing. Because shortly after the truth came out, Victor Hale disappeared entirely, taking several of his most trusted staff with him, fearing retaliation from Damiano, despite the confrontation being resolved. If your brother was one of the people caught in that questioning, it is possible he was pulled into hiding along with Victor, whether willingly or not. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. For 8 months, I had feared the worst, believing Daniel might be dead, a casualty of a world he never should have been part of. Now, for the first time, there was a possibility, however uncertain, that he might still be alive, hidden somewhere beyond the reach of the danger that had swallowed him. Where would Victor have gone? I asked urgently. Please, if you know anything at all. Elijah shook his head slowly. I have not spoken to anyone connected to Victor in months. He was careful, methodical, the kind of man who plans an escape long before he ever needs one. If he wanted to disappear completely, he would have the means to do it. Nora leaned forward slightly. Is there anyone else who might know more? Anyone still connected to that world who might have heard something since? Elijah considered the question for a long moment before answering. There is one person, he said finally. Someone who worked closely with Damiano during that entire situation, close enough to know exactly what happened during those questionings, and what became of everyone involved afterward. Who? I asked, though somewhere deep inside, I already suspected the answer before he spoke it. Damiano himself, Elijah said. If anyone in this city knows the full truth about what happened to your brother, it is the man you have been trying so hard to avoid. Silence filled the small apartment as his words settled over us. I had feared this conclusion from the very beginning, the growing certainty that eventually, no matter how much I searched elsewhere, the truth would lead directly back to Damiano Costa. Sitting in Elijah's quiet apartment, surrounded by the weight of everything I had learned, I finally allowed myself to accept what Nora had gently warned me about days earlier. There would be no way forward without facing him directly. Thank you, I said quietly to Elijah, rising from the couch. You have given me more than I expected to learn today. Elijah nodded, though worry remained etched across his face. Be careful, he said. If you truly intend to ask Damiano about this, be honest with him, and be respectful. He is not a man who responds well to deception, but from what I understand, he is not without reason either, especially when someone approaches him with truth instead of fear. We thanked him again and left his apartment, stepping back out into the busy street beyond, the noise and movement of the city feeling strangely distant after the intensity of the conversation we had just left behind. Nora walked beside me in silence for several minutes, before finally speaking. Are you prepared for this? She asked. Truly prepared, not simply willing? I thought carefully before answering, considering everything I had learned, every fear I had carried since the moment I first stepped behind that curtain in Damiano's study. I do not know if I am fully prepared, I admitted, but I know I cannot continue circling this truth from a distance any longer. If Damiano holds the answers I have been searching for, then I have to go to him directly, whatever the outcome may be. Nora studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, a quiet respect visible in her expression. Then we do this together, she said. I will not let you face him alone. Her words steadied something inside me, a small but powerful comfort amid the uncertainty ahead. Together, we made our way back toward the mansion, the weight of the coming confrontation settling heavily over both of us with every step closer we took. By the time we reached the gates, evening had settled over the city, the sky darkening into deep shades of orange and purple above the tall walls surrounding Damiano's estate. I paused at the entrance, staring up at the mansion that had become both my workplace and, over the past several days, the center of a mystery I could never have imagined when I first arrived there 2 years earlier. "Tonight," I said quietly. "I will speak to him tonight, before my courage has the chance to fail me." Nora placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Then let us go together," she said. "Whatever happens next, you will not face it alone." We walked through the gates side by side, the weight of everything ahead pressing heavily against my chest. Yet beneath that fear, a quiet determination remained unshaken. After 8 long months of silence, uncertainty, and unanswered questions, I was finally ready to face the one man who might hold the truth about my brother's fate. Inside, the house had settled into its usual evening quiet, the staff finishing their final duties before retiring for the night. I found Julian near the main hall and asked, in as steady a voice as I could manage, whether Damiano was available. He studied me with a puzzled expression, clearly unaccustomed to a member of the household staff requesting an audience directly, but after a moment, he simply nodded and led me toward the study, Nora following close behind. Julian knocked once before opening the door, announcing my presence briefly before stepping aside to let me enter. Damiano sat behind his desk, the same desk where everything had begun days earlier, papers arranged neatly in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, though a flicker of curiosity crossed his features when he noticed Nora standing quietly beside me. "Elena," he said, setting down his pen. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" My heart pounded so loudly I feared he could hear it from across the room, but I forced myself to speak, my voice trembling only slightly. "I need to ask you about something, and I need you to know the truth before I do, even if it costs me my position in this house." Something shifted in his expression, a quiet attentiveness replacing the earlier curiosity. "Go on," he said. 8 months ago, my brother Daniel Ashford worked as a driver for Victor Hale," I said, forcing the words out steadily despite the fear coiling tightly in my chest. "He disappeared the same week you and Victor had a falling out. I found records connecting him to that night, records showing he was questioned afterward, and then nothing. No further trace of him exists anywhere I have searched. I need to know if you know what happened to him." Silence stretched across the room, heavy and absolute. Damiano's gaze remained fixed on me, studying my face carefully, searching for something I could not name. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight I had not expected. "Daniel Ashford," he repeated quietly, as though testing the name against a memory buried deep. "I remember him. Quiet young man, careful with his words, the kind of driver who noticed everything, but said very little." My breath caught painfully in my throat. "You remember him?" "I do," Damiano said. "Victor betrayed my trust that year, feeding information about my operations to people who wished to see me fail. When the truth came to light, everyone connected to his staff was questioned, your brother included. He was cleared quickly. He had done nothing wrong beyond simply working for a man who had." "Then why did he never come home?" I asked, my voice breaking despite every effort to remain composed. "Why has no one heard from him since that night?" Damiano's expression grew heavier, something that looked almost like regret settling across his features. "Because Victor, fearing retaliation despite the matter being resolved, fled the city that same week, taking several of his most trusted staff with him as protection, believing more hands around him meant more safety. Your brother was among them, whether by choice or by Victor's insistence. I do not know for certain." The room seemed to tilt slightly around me, relief and fear colliding violently within my chest. "Are you saying he might still be alive?" "It is possible," Damiano said carefully. "I have had no reason to search for Victor since he fled. Our business concluded the moment he left the city, and I considered the matter closed. But if your brother was taken along in that departure, there is no evidence suggesting harm came to him specifically. Victor was not a man who valued cruelty, only self-preservation. Tears I had held back for 8 long months finally threatened to fall, though I fought to keep my composure standing before him. "Do you know where Victor went?" Damiano was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken further. "I have suspicions," he said finally. "Nothing confirmed, but enough to point you in a direction, if you are prepared to follow it." "I am," I said immediately, without hesitation. He nodded slowly, something shifting further in his expression, the cold authority I had feared since the moment I first hid behind his study curtain, now replaced by something quieter, more human. "Then let us discuss what I know," he said. "And Elena, for whatever it is worth, I am sorry it has taken you this long to hear even this much of the truth." I glanced briefly at Nora, who stood quietly near the doorway, her eyes shining with the same disbelief and cautious hope I felt rising within my own chest. Neither of us had expected this conversation to unfold with anything close to gentleness. Yet standing there, listening to the man I had feared for 2 years speak with genuine regret, I understood that everything I believed about this house, and about him, had been far more complicated than simple fear could ever explain. "Sit," Damiano said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "This will take some time to explain properly, and you deserve to hear all of it, not simply fragments pulled from records or second-hand memories." I sat down slowly, my hands still trembling, my heart caught somewhere between grief for the months I had lost, and a fragile, growing hope that perhaps, after everything, my search was finally nearing an end that did not end in loss. Damiano poured 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of me, before returning to his seat, and for the first time since I had known him, the space between us felt less like danger, and more like careful, uncertain trust. "After Victor fled the city," he began, "I received limited reports from contacts who continued tracking his movements out of their own interests, unrelated to my affairs directly. Victor was cautious, but caution leaves traces if you know where to look. My understanding is that he settled somewhere along the northern coast, in a smaller town where wealth draws less attention, blending in among others who value privacy for their own reasons. Do you know the name of this town?" I asked, my voice steadier now, though my hands still trembled slightly around the glass in front of me. "Ravensbrook," Damiano said, "a quiet place, several hours from the city, known for those who prefer to disappear quietly rather than vanish suddenly. If Victor took your brother with him, that is where I would begin searching." Nora, still standing near the doorway, finally stepped forward, her voice careful but firm. "Why are you telling her this? You have no obligation to help, and yet you are offering information that could easily be seen as interference in a matter you considered closed months ago." Damiano regarded her for a long moment before answering, something contemplative settling across his features. "Because carrying guilt over consequences I did not intend is not a weight I wish to hold longer than necessary," he said. "Victor's betrayal was his own. The people caught in the aftermath, including a driver who did nothing but perform his job faithfully, deserved better than becoming collateral damage in a conflict that was never theirs to bear." His words settled heavily over the room, revealing a side of him I had never imagined existed beneath the reputation that preceded him everywhere he went. I thought of every whispered warning I had heard about this man since arriving in his household, every assumption I had carried about his coldness, his ruthlessness, his unwillingness to show mercy. Sitting there, listening to him speak with quiet regret about a situation he had not caused but still felt responsible for, I understood that the truth of a person rarely matched the stories told about them by those who feared them most. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion I could no longer hold back. "For telling me this, for not simply dismissing me when I came to you with questions I had no right to demand answers to." "You had every right," Damiano said. "Family deserves answers, even when the truth is complicated to give. I only regret that fear kept you from asking sooner, though I understand entirely why you hesitated." We spoke for a while longer, Damiano offering additional details about Ravensbrook, describing the general area where Victor's associates were rumored to have settled, and offering, unexpectedly, resources that could help me travel there safely and discreetly. Nora remained close throughout, her presence steady and reassuring, though her expression carried the same disbelief I felt at how dramatically the evening had unfolded from where it began. Before I left the study that night, Damiano offered one final piece of guidance. When you find Victor, and if your brother is truly among those who traveled with him, tell them both the matter between Victor and myself is settled. There is no reason for either of them to continue living in hiding, out of fear connected to me. Whatever choices your brother makes from this point forward, they no longer need to include looking over his shoulder because of anything tied to this house. The relief that flooded through me at those words was almost overwhelming. A release of tension I had carried so long, I had nearly forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "Thank you," I said again, quieter this time, unable to find words large enough to match the gratitude filling my chest. 3 days later, with careful arrangements made, and a brief leave granted from my duties, Nora and I traveled together toward Ravensbrook, following the general direction Damiano had provided. The journey took most of the day, winding roads eventually giving way to a small coastal town exactly as he had described. Quiet streets lined with modest homes, and a harbor filled with fishing boats swaying gently against the docks. We spent the first day asking careful, discreet questions at local shops and cafes, describing Victor Hale without using his name directly, watching for any flicker of recognition among the residents we spoke with. Most conversations led nowhere, polite confusion or simple unfamiliarity meeting our inquiries at every turn. By evening, exhaustion and doubt had begun creeping into my thoughts, the fear that this search, like so many before it, might end in disappointment rather than answers. We had almost given up for the day, the light beginning to fade and our list of shops nearly exhausted, when Nora suggested we try one final street near the harbor before returning to the small inn where we had arranged to stay the night. The narrow lane was lined with weathered buildings, a hardware store, a small chapel, and at the very end, a bakery, with warm light spilling from its windows into the growing dusk. "One more try," Nora said, squeezing my hand briefly. "We have come this far. A little more searching will not hurt." I nodded, though exhaustion pressed heavily against every part of me, both physical and emotional. The uncertainty of the entire journey, the fear that we might have followed a false lead all the way to this quiet coastal town, only to find nothing waiting for us at the end of it, weighed on my thoughts more than I wanted to admit aloud. Yet beneath that exhaustion, something steadier remained, the same determination that had carried me through every dangerous step since the day I first hid behind Damiano's study curtain. We pushed open the bakery door, a small bell chiming softly overhead, the smell of fresh bread filling the air around us. An older woman looked up from behind the counter, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, offering a warm, welcoming smile despite the late hour. "We are closing soon," she said kindly, "but I can still help you with something quick, if you would like." "Actually," I said carefully, "we are not here for bread. We are trying to find someone, a family that may have moved into town several months ago. I know it is an unusual question, but any information would mean more to us than you could imagine." Then, at a small bakery near the edge of town, an older woman behind the counter paused when I described the man we were searching for, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully before she spoke. "There is a family that moved here several months ago, kept mostly to themselves," she said. "A father, and a young man who works with him at the harbor most mornings, unloading cargo from the boats. Quiet, polite, but never talk much about where they came from." My heart began pounding rapidly. "The young man," I said carefully. "Would you happen to know his name?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Daniel, I believe." "Yes, that sounds right. Daniel." The world seemed to still around me entirely, every sound fading except the rapid beating of my own heart. Nora placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, her own eyes wide with disbelief and hope. We thanked the woman quickly, and hurried toward the harbor she had described, my legs moving faster than I had thought possible after the exhaustion of the day's search. The harbor stretched out before us as we arrived, boats bobbing gently in the fading evening light, workers finishing their final tasks before the sun disappeared completely beyond the horizon. My eyes scanned every figure desperately, searching for a face I had not seen in 8 long months, fearing at any moment that hope might dissolve into another disappointment. Then I saw him. He stood near the far end of the dock, sleeves rolled to his elbows, helping another man secure ropes along the side of a small fishing vessel. He looked thinner than I remembered, his skin darker from months spent working beneath open skies, but there was no mistaking him. My brother, alive, standing only a short distance away. "Daniel?" I called out, my voice breaking as it left my throat. He turned immediately at the sound of his name, confusion crossing his features before recognition replaced it entirely, his eyes widening as he saw me standing at the edge of the dock. For a moment, neither of us moved, the shock of the reunion holding us both perfectly still. Then he was running toward me, and I was running toward him, closing the distance that 8 agonizing months had placed between us. He wrapped his arms around me tightly, and I finally allowed the tears I had held back for so long to fall freely, relief and grief and joy tangled together in a way I could not fully separate. "I thought I would never see you again," I whispered against his shoulder. "I did not know if it was safe to contact anyone," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Victor said staying quiet was the only way to protect everyone, including you. I wanted to reach out so many times, but I was afraid it would put you in danger." We stood together on that dock for a long time, holding on to each other as the sun finally disappeared beneath the horizon, the harbor lights flickering to life around us. Nora stood a respectful distance away, giving us the moment we both desperately needed, though I caught her wiping quickly at her own eyes when I glanced toward her. Later that evening, Daniel introduced us properly to Victor Hale, an older man with tired eyes and a cautious demeanor that softened only slightly once I explained everything Damiano had shared before we left the city. When I told him the matter was finally settled, that neither he nor Daniel needed to remain in hiding any longer, something in Victor's posture eased for the first time since we had arrived, as though a weight he had carried for months had finally been lifted. "I never wanted to involve your brother in any of this," Victor said quietly. "He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong moment, loyal enough to stay by my side when he could have easily walked away. I owe him more than I can properly repay." Daniel shook his head firmly. "You gave me somewhere safe to go when everything fell apart. I do not regret staying." We spent that night in Ravensbrook, sharing a simple meal together, filling the silence of 8 lost months with stories and explanations neither of us had been able to share until now. Daniel spoke of the fear he carried during those first weeks after fleeing the city, uncertain whether Damiano's reach extended even to a quiet coastal town, and the slow, cautious relief that grew as months passed without incident. As the night stretched on, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led to this moment, beginning with a single afternoon when Damiano Costa came home 4 hours early, and a young maid named Nora whispered a warning that ultimately changed the course of everything that followed. Without her quick instincts, without her willingness to trust a woman she barely knew, I might never have survived long enough to uncover the truth that finally reunited me with my brother. Before we returned to the city the following morning, I sent word back to Damiano through a contact Nora trusted completely, confirming that Daniel had been found safe, and expressing gratitude that words alone could hardly capture. The reply that came back was brief, simple, yet carried a weight I had not expected from a man once defined entirely by fear and reputation in my mind. "I am glad the truth finally brought you peace. Some debts are worth settling honestly, even when they cost nothing but the truth itself." Standing at the edge of that quiet harbor, watching the morning light stretch across the water, I understood that the mansion I once viewed only through fear had also, unexpectedly, given me something I never anticipated finding within its walls. Not simply answers, but proof that even within a world shaped by danger and secrecy, genuine kindness could still exist, waiting quietly beneath the surface for someone brave enough to seek it out. My brother was alive. The truth I had searched for so desperately had finally been found. And though the road that led me here had been more dangerous than I ever imagined when it began, I would not trade a single difficult step for the relief of finally holding Daniel in my arms again, safe, whole, and free from the shadows that had kept him hidden for far too long. When Nora and I returned to the city 2 days later, the mansion felt different somehow, as though the walls I once associated only with fear and careful silence now carried a different weight entirely. Julian greeted us at the entrance, offering only a brief nod, though something in his expression suggested he already understood more than he let on about where we had traveled and why. Damiano called me into his study that same evening, and this time, I walked through the door without the trembling fear that had once accompanied every step near that room. He looked up from his desk as I entered, setting aside the papers in front of him, a quiet curiosity replacing the guarded formality that once defined our conversations. "You found him," he said, not as a question, but as a simple, certain statement. "I did," I said, "thanks to you, and to Nora, and to a stranger who trusted me enough to point me in the right direction. My brother is alive, and for the first time in 8 months, I finally feel like I can breathe without carrying that fear every single day." Something eased visibly in Damiano's expression, a quiet satisfaction settling over features that had once seemed permanently guarded to me. "I am glad," he said simply. "Not every story that begins in this house ends with relief. I am grateful yours did." We spoke for a while longer, and before I left his study that evening, he offered something I had not expected, an assurance that my position within the household remained secure, that nothing about the questions I had asked or the search I had undertaken would be held against me. It was a small kindness, perhaps, in the larger scope of everything that had happened, yet it meant more to me than words could easily express. Daniel returned to the city not long after, choosing to remain close to Victor Hale, who had decided to rebuild his life quietly, away from the world that once defined him so completely. My brother found honest work near the harbor district, far removed from the danger that had once surrounded him, and though the months that followed carried their own adjustments and challenges, the fear that had haunted both of us slowly began to fade into something more manageable, something closer to peace. Nora remained my closest friend within that house, our bond strengthened permanently by everything we had faced together, from that first frightened moment behind the study curtain to the quiet relief of a reunion neither of us had been certain we would witness. Whenever I think back to the day Damiano came home early, the day everything began with nothing more than a whispered warning to stay quiet, I understand now that fear was never the true center of that story. It was courage, quiet and persistent, carried by people I least expected to offer it, that ultimately led me toward the truth I had spent so many months desperately searching for. And in the end, that truth brought not destruction, as I once feared it might, but the kind of peace I had almost given up believing I would ever find again.